Welcome back to the channel. I'm Rob.
And I'm David.
And today we are going to give you our in-depth review of our recent 26-day African cruise. It was incredible. There were pros and cons. We're going to share all of that with you today. So we were on two back-to-back cruises. The first one started in Doha in Qatar. We went to the United Arab Emirates, the Seychelles, Madagascar, Reunion. We ended in Mauritius, but instead of getting off the ship, we stayed on and we went back to Reunion, another stop in Madagascar, and then a couple of stops in South Africa before we ended in Cape Town.
Now, the reason we chose this cruise may be a little obvious because of that itinerary. It was amazing. We've always wanted to go to Madagascar. We've always wanted to go to Seychelles. We've always wanted to go to Mozambique. What? We didn't mention Mozambique. When we had booked the cruise, Mozambique was a part of the itinerary. That ended up being dropped. But it was the itinerary that attracted us the most. Although we would not have known about this cruise if it wasn't for our friends Karen and Jeff, and they had asked us to come along, and it was the holidays. We were going to celebrate Christmas and New Year's and our anniversary on the ship, and we could not resist spending time with our friends and enjoying the holidays in these amazing locations.
Now, we sailed on Norwegian, which is our favorite line because they tend to be pretty good about doing really interesting itineraries. But there are other lines that sail to Africa in this region of the world. Holland America, Royal Caribbean, Princess, MSC. A lot of lines go here. So even if you aren't looking to sail with Norwegian, we're going to talk about some of our ports and some of the more interesting things that happen when you sail to Africa and less used ports. So you might still be able to get something out of this review. And finally, just to note, we are going to do separate reviews of the Norwegian Dawn, the ship itself. We're going to do another review on kind of the state of Norwegian cruising with them post 2020, where some things have changed. Some of that we're going to get into in this video. There'll be a little bit of crossover, but just know we are going to do separate, more in-depth videos on their own. We will also be doing port reviews. So every port we went to, we're going to let you know what we did and kind of our experience in those ports and with tours that we took. So if you are interested in any of this other content, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you can be here to see some of our next videos.
Before we get started, I wanted to say that we're going to talk about a ton of stuff. Some of the stuff at the end that you're not going to want to miss include the cost and some of the problems we had with the cruise. So right now, let's get into our cabin.
When David and I usually cruise, we pick inside cabins much of the time. They are much cheaper, much less expensive to get. But also, most of the time we spend in the room is there to sleep or relax. And so we don't really worry too much about having a fancier room because we don't usually take advantage of them. However, and this is going to be something we talk about in our review of the ship, we have sailed on the Dawn before, and one of our biggest problems with it is that there is not an observation lounge. I think there used to be. I think in 2016, I think is when they did a massive refurbishment and they replaced their observation deck with suites. And so because it doesn't have that place where you can go and just hang out and look out at the water, it's kind of an awkward ship for us. It's a good size. We like it. But because there wasn't that place to sit and because this was going to be a long and kind of a celebration cruise, we decided to splurge and we went for a balcony cabin. We were very, very happy about this decision. It definitely cost a little bit more, but having that extra space, we had a couch in the room with a table. We had, of course, the balcony where we could go outside and get some fresh air and some sun. This is our first time on Norwegian that we've ever had a balcony cabin, and I really enjoyed it. What about you?
I was so glad we made that choice.
Yes. We definitely paid a little bit more for it, and we are going to do a full in-depth review of our cabin, so that'll be coming later. But just know we enjoyed this cabin. We love the bathrooms, especially on Norwegian. They don't have those weird, cramped, shower curtain-y bathrooms that we've seen on other ships. It's a nice big shower area. There's plenty of places for us to kind of put our things away in the closet and some drawers.
We were on deck 9 for the first cruise and deck 10 for the second cruise. And we were always in an area of the ship that seemed to be quiet enough
Yeah.
Not a lot of noise around us.
We didn't actually choose our rooms. We had the sail away fare where we picked the class of cabin and the ship itself chose our actual cabin for us. But we just got really lucky, as we usually do.
Yeah.
But both of our cabins were in terrific locations toward the front of the ship, which we enjoy. And we just had a good experience. So thumbs up for cabins on Norwegian. One thing that is very subjective about cruises is the quality of the food. We are very happy with the food on Norwegian. I know a lot of people, you hear people who hate one line and love another line, and everybody's going to have their own opinion, as will you. But for us, we really like the food on Norwegian. We find it to be very high quality. And it does, when you're on back-to-back cruises, it does get a little bit repetitive, although I assume that's going to be the same on any cruise line where you're eating kind of the same things over and over again. But we really had a great experience. We love the main dining room in the Venetian. They also have the aqua dining room in midship, which we think is just a little bit noisy. It's lower ceilings. It's a perfectly fine place, and the food is the same as in the Venetian. We just like the ambiance better in the Venetian dining room. Now, we are people who eat early, and so we were usually there at 5 o'clock to eat dinner because we wanted to be ready to go to the 7 o'clock show. And as such, we almost always got seated right back against the windows, overlooking the back of the ship. It was really nice. We had some great seats and we had a great experience. All of the staff there, from the waiters and the helpers and the maitre d's, everybody was always on point, very friendly and helpful. And we enjoyed the menus, so that was really good. There are some other dining options that you have on Norwegian. There's the Oceans right in the middle that is open all day long, and they do more like hamburgers and wings and stuff like that. There was bamboo. Now, this is something that happened in the middle of our cruise, but on our first cruise, bamboo is a restaurant. It's Asian, and it's always been one of the free restaurants that you can go to. You have to make reservations because it gets really crowded. But we went to that on our first cruise, and then when we switched over in Mauritius for the second cruise, they switched it. And I don't really know if this was, I think it was probably fleet-wide, but they've changed it now to a specialty restaurant. They completely changed the menu. That was very disappointing for us because we liked having that alternative. You know, if you were just got a little bit tired of going somewhere else, it was nice to have that Asian option. So that's kind of disappointing, but that's what cruising is doing today. And then there's the buffet. What did you think about the buffet?
I didn't always love the buffet.
We're not really buffet people. We don't really eat in the buffet. Sometimes we'll go for breakfast because it's easy to go, you know, in the morning before you get off on a ship.
Yeah.
Or
breakfast, I think it's great. Lunch, I think it's great. We did go for dinner one time, and I was disappointed with pretty much everything I got. So
yeah. I mean, nothing is terrible. You can always find stuff that is going to be fine, but the quality is definitely lower than what you're going to get even in the main dining room. There are lots of options. There were always some Asian options. There was desserts and stuff. We're Americans, so I feel like only Americans can do dessert properly. I don't get into European desserts. They're not sweet enough for me. And so usually I didn't like the dessert options anyway that were in the buffet. So our ship both sailings were completely full. And there were times when the buffet seemed full. Like, we only went there for dinner the one time, but usually we were able to find seats without too much trouble.
The only time it gets crowded is on the morning of a port day when everyone's trying to get breakfast.
Yeah. But in those cases, you can go to the main dining room and do a sit down, and that could kind of, relieve some of that congestion anyway. And then there are the specialty restaurants, which we really enjoy because we have status. We have platinum status. We got a couple of free dinners on both cruises. So we went to Cagney's twice, which is my favorite restaurant on Norwegian. The filet mignon is amazing. They've got some good sides. We really, really enjoyed the food there. We went to Los Lobos, which is the Mexican restaurant, and we really enjoyed that too. They had one of the waiters came out and handmade guacamole at our table for us, which was really kind of fun. And then we went to the
Italian.
It was very good. Our friends that we went with had some steak there, and they said they liked that steak better than Cagney's. I had some pasta. It was all very good. Now, one thing I will say about the food is we try and take a lot of pictures and video to share with you guys. The main dining room especially, but also the specialty restaurants, were all very dark. And so a lot of the pictures we tried to take didn't come out. They don't look appetizing because it's just so dark. But the food, I'm telling you, was excellent. We had a very good experience. We just didn't get a lot of footage of it, but it was great.
One thing special about this cruise was, since it was a holiday cruise, they did have special dinners. They made a big effort to have really nice dinners on both Christmas and on New Year's Eve, and we appreciated that.
Yeah, we were in the main dining room for both of those and had excellent meals.
One thing we definitely love about Norwegian Cruise Line and the staff on this ship particularly was that they were fantastic. Everyone was so friendly and so helpful and so willing to make our stay the best that it could be.
Yeah, from the waiters and the cabin stewards and the people we talked to at the front desk and shore excursion, like everybody was just seemed like they were in a good mood and were very helpful. I know, especially you see on Norwegian right now where they have made staff cuts, and you know those people are working harder than ever, and yet still people had smiles for us.
But one thing we did notice on this ship is that people are being moved around more often.
Yes, it was really weird. So on previous cruises, because we sat basically in the same place every night for dinner, but instead of having the same waiters over and over again, it was like different every night. We'd have somebody new. And so we got to know a lot of different people, which was fun, but we didn't make those same connections that we have on previous cruises where you're seeing the same waiter over and over again. I don't know if they were just doing some kind of big cross-training event, but it's like the waiters weren't just moving sections, they were moving restaurants. And so, you go to specialty restaurant and you'd see people you recognize from the main dining room or from Oceans or wherever. And so because everybody was getting moved around so much, we didn't have the same kind of connection that we've had on previous cruises, but still everybody was in a good mood. We enjoyed that aspect. So let's talk about the ship itself, the NCL Dawn. This is a ship we have sailed on before, back in, I think, 2018. We did another Christmas cruise, ironically, in the Caribbean. And so we're a little bit familiar with the ship. Also, its sister ship is the Star, which we have also sailed on before. So it is a good ship. I'd say it's that mid-range. We like the size. It holds 2,340 passengers if they're at full capacity, which apparently we were on both of our cruises, is what they told us. And so it's a good size ship. It never feels overcrowded. Even though there are some problems with the ship, they do a good job of somehow everybody disperses out. And whether we were in the dining room or up on the pool deck, there's people around, of course, but it never felt overly crowded. And I really like that. I would say the ship, even though, like I've said, the staff is cut and there's not as many people around, I felt the ship itself was, up to standards. It's a bit older of a ship. It's a little bit more dated than some of the other newer ones, but it's perfectly well decorated. We thought the maintenance was fine. We did notice perhaps a few more little blemishes here or there that didn't get repaired as quickly as we've seen in the past, but nothing was overtly dirty or broken or an issue like that.
Yeah. So our only real problem with the ship is probably the layout of the ship. There aren't any good outdoor spaces for dining, and there's no good internal lounges for hanging out. Yeah. A lot of the lounges are in the middle of walkways or in dark corners. There's no big observation deck. So we actually spent more time in our room when it was time to relax than we did out and about on the ship. And we would rather do the opposite. Yeah,
it's really disappointing there's not an outdoor place to eat like on some of the other ships. You can take your food from the buffet and go out to the pool deck, but usually that area is very crowded, and so trying to find a table is a challenge. They do have a little outdoor bar, and I think they have food up there at the Bimini Grill that overlooks the pool. However, that is the official smoking area, and so we never wanted to go there. Most of the other ships, like the Sun, they've got a dining area out on the back of the ship. The Spirit had a great one. And here they've given that space over to the kid pool, which I'm glad the kids have a place to go, and that's terrific. But that seems like prime real estate. And at least on this cruise in Africa, it was
never
empty. Yeah, there was never anyone out there. And so, you'd be doing laps and you'd walk by this empty, terrific area. It's like, I wish we could come in and sit here and have a sandwich or something. So the layout of the ship is not my favorite, but overall I don't think it's a problem. And we still, it was worth it to be on this great itinerary, so we took it all in stride.
Right now we're going to do a quick overview of each port that we went to on the entire cruise. We're not going to talk about everything we did because we're going to talk about those individually in different videos. So first of all, we stopped in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates.
Now, this is a place where we had to get off the ship and go through face-to-face immigration in the port because we went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Everybody had to get off, whether they were going to get off the ship in Abu Dhabi or not. Everybody had to get off, go through immigration, and then you could get right back on. This is a port where you can't just walk into town. The port is very large, and so you have to have transportation to go anywhere. There were lots of taxis available if you wanted to hire a taxi. There were some hop-on, hop-off buses that were, in my opinion, very overpriced, but they were there as an option to take you into town. We were still very jet lagged and tired, so we didn't get off the ship in Abu Dhabi except for to do the immigration, and we kind of looked around a little bit. We just took the rest day and enjoyed that. Next up was Dubai. Dubai is another place where you cannot just walk off the ship. You have to have transportation. We did hear that there was a shuttle bus to one of the lesser known malls. We didn't actually ever see it, but someone told us that it was there. We just went up and there was a taxi queue that was the most organized taxi queue I think I have ever seen. We went up, there was a security officer, got us, into a car. The guy turned on his meter. We didn't even have to ask him about it. It was very easy. He took us into town, and then we were able to get an Uber back to the port later that day.
Our next stop was the Seychelles. We had two ports. One was La Digue, and this place is really gorgeous. You're going to love it. This is a tender port, but once you get off the tender, it is easy to walk around. Mm-hmm. You could take excursions, but walking around the island is perfectly easy, or renting a bike. The next port is
Port Victoria.
And this is another beautiful spot. It's a little more of a town. It's a local town. You can easily walk off the ship and walk to town or to the Botanic Gardens.
Yeah, we were able to dock right in town, so it's an easy way, no tenders, you just walk on and walk off. Then we went to Antsiranana in Madagascar. This is another tender port. Madagascar is a pretty poor area. The town there wasn't much to look at. We did talk to a couple people who walked around, and they didn't really have, there's just not a lot to do there. Yeah, and so this is a place you're going to want to get a tour, whether through the ship. We did a private tour to take you off and do some of the excursions around. And it is a tender port, so you have to factor that into your timing.
Yeah. Then we went down to Reunion Island. Reunion Island, this is a place where you'll need transportation or a tour. Was it a dock?
It was a dock.
It was a dock. So you're actually docking. You can walk off the ship, but there's not much in that area. So you will want transportation to go do your activities there.
Next up was Mauritius. Now this was our turnaround point. So from the dock, you can walk into town. It's a healthy walk. It's not super close, but it is walkable. We walked into town, kind of looked around, and then just got back on the ship. If you are boarding in Mauritius, just know they are not really set up for cruise ships. There is no cruise terminal. They had a tent set up, and people who embarked in Mauritius complained a lot about it. There just wasn't the support there. People were standing in a very long line for a very long time trying to get on. We were lucky that as back-to-backers, we were already checked in and we just got to walk past the line and get back on the ship. And so I was glad about that. But as far as getting into town, there's not a whole lot to do. Again, we were there on a weekend, but it might be a place you want to try and book a tour.
After that, the second cruise had started. We went back to Reunion and then back to Antsiranana. And then we went to
Nosy.
Nosy. It is a tender port, so factor that in. You can walk into town. We did not. We don't know anyone who did.
No,
We took
this
a
is
tour.
definitely a place
Definitely
you're going to want to take a
take a
tour.
tour.
There are some really cool different tours around that you can do. We did a fantastic one to see some lemurs and get on a beach where
Go
the dolphins
swimming,
swam
yeah.
by.
It was really lovely.
It was really beautiful. The tender isn't too bad there.
And the port there is very busy. So a lot of the boats going in and out are for the locals. So it does take a little longer if you're on a tour to get onto your boat. So
Yeah.
be prepared for that. Then we went down to South Africa. Our first was Mosel Bay. Yes?
Port Elizabeth.
Port Elizabeth.
Port Elizabeth was
Switch
first.
those around.
Yes.
Port Elizabeth. This town.
So this was a docking port. We got to come right into the dock,
Which
and
is very nice.
and we had an overnight port there. So the first night we just got off the ship and kind of walked into the downtown area. It is not the nicest area, it's kind of by the docks. It looks like it probably used to be the little hub, and now it's just, everything's moved away from it. We started walking down the street and we got to a certain point where a security guard said, you probably don't want to walk any farther than this. This is where you want to turn around. So we kind of walked around and saw it, and it was fine for what it was, but not a whole lot to do there.
Also, this is a place you're going to want to take a tour.
Yeah.
And this is a great place for tours because this is where you can do any of your safari type activities.
Yes. So we did a ship tour, our very first ever ship tour, which ended up being excellent, to an elephant sanctuary, or not a sanctuary, but a preserve. And we had a great experience there. There were other ones that you could take, and that's definitely someplace we'd recommend a tour.
So then we went to Mosel Bay.
Mosel Bay.
Now, this is a place that you can definitely walk around.
This is a tender port as well.
Port. You can get off the ship. You can walk over towards where the lighthouse is. You can hike along the cliff trail. It's just a really pretty waterfront. I don't know what other people did. I guess you could probably do some of the same safari type excursions if you wanted. But if you wanted to just walk around, you can do that here.
And then we ended in Cape Town. Just to note that sailing into Cape Town, it was like, 6 o'clock in the morning. Cape Town is one of the most beautiful cities ever. So I definitely recommend get up early so you can watch that sailing coming to the bay and Table Mountain. It is beautiful. We were up early enough. We got to see as we sailed around the Cape of Good Hope. It was terrific. It is a docking port, so we pulled right up into the terminal. From there, you can walk into town, the waterfront area, if you want to do that, because we had an overnight stop there as well. And so we just walked into the waterfront. We had a lovely time there. And then the next day when we had to get off, it was very easy to get a Uber to take us to our hotel. There's a lot of great stops on this cruise. Like I said, we'll do more videos and kind of go through each one in detail because it's so much information in this video. It's already long enough. But this is an itinerary that we really wanted to do, and we're glad we got to do it.
In between all these amazing ports, there are sea days. And on this cruise, there were quite a few. I think we had about 10 sea days. So there's a lot of time for you to relax on the ship and do whatever you enjoy doing. On this cruise, it seemed like most people enjoyed sitting by the pool, which is not our thing, but the pool deck was packed at all times. It was pretty phenomenal. So there's also all kinds of activities on sea days. I will say they didn't always seem to be prepared for the amount of people. For example, one time we went to do origami, and they had 20 pieces of paper and about 100 people in the room. So that didn't go over well. Another time I went to a jewelry making thing, and again, they did not have enough materials for all the people who showed up. And that seemed to be kind of a running theme. I almost stopped going to things because I felt like I wouldn't be able to participate because I'm not going to be one of the pushy people who runs up and grabs my piece of paper first. But there was lots to do.
Let's talk about the entertainment.
Okay, entertainment.
Because Norwegian in general, we have some complaints here, but in general, Norwegian does some great entertainment. Our favorite always, we're ex-Broadway actors. We love the production casts. We want to see those singers and dancers do their stuff. And they had, I think, 3 shows. There was a Christmas show they did. They had the Soul Rockin' Nights or something like that. There's the end show that they do, Elements, which we've seen on several other productions. And the cast was terrific. I would say the dance corps of this cast is probably my favorite dance corps on any ship that we've ever been on. They were super strong and talented and really fun to watch. There were some really terrific singers. We had a really good time with the production cast. In addition to them, they of course had some headliners. There was a couple of different singers. There was a couple different violinists. One was from Poland, and she had like a crystal violin that she played. Very good showmanship, and so we really enjoyed those. There was a comedian that we didn't really
hypnotist,
those
types of
the
things.
hypnotist was fun, and so there was some entertainment. Now, where I have problems with the entertainment is they played 4 movies during this 26-day cruise. And for me, having nightly entertainment be a movie is unacceptable. That is not okay. That is not why I came on a cruise, that I'm going to go see The Marvels. For Christmas Eve, they did, what was it called? Daddy's Home 2? Like, I don't know what this movie is. Like, it's Christmas Eve. We were doing an overnight in Dubai. I think a lot of people were off the ship anyway. And so I get you don't want to do a big production thing, but like, show a Christmas story. Show It's a Wonderful Life. Like, show a Christmas movie people actually know and love and want to watch, not Daddy's Home 2, which I've never even heard of. And there's some good people in it. And I'm sure it's a fine movie, but I don't think that's acceptable entertainment. I think Norwegian has really dropped the ball. We noticed this on our other post-2020 cruise when we were in the South Pacific, where they've now started playing movies. I maintain that is unacceptable, and they need to fill those spots with better entertainment. The other real big complaint I have about the entertainment is they've gotten rid of their guest lecturers. This used to be one of my favorite parts of the entertainment, is where we were on a transatlantic cruise, and this guy got up and talked to us for an hour about waves. And it seemed like, what are we even talking about? And he was so interesting. Like, he knew everything about the dynamics of waves and how high they get and what storms do and all the different things. It was so interesting. We've been on other cruises where they'll have people come in and talk about the ports or talk about the wildlife. And it is one of my favorite parts of cruising, is getting to have these little educational sessions that are very entertaining. The one they did do is they did let the hypnotist do a couple of seminars on self-meditation and self-hypnosis. That was very interesting. So I really appreciated those, but that was it over 26 days. They absolutely have to bring back guest lecturers on Norwegian, or I'm going to keep complaining about it, because it's one of my favorite things. They need to bring it back. What else? There was a lot of bands that play around the ship.
Yeah, they have very, very talented people who are in all of their bands and quartets and ensembles. It's really they hire some very good people.
Yeah, and the fun thing about that is on a Christmas cruise, at Christmas time when they're singing Christmas music, it just makes everything seem very festive, and we enjoyed that a lot.
A little note on weather for this cruise. I think generally it's a good time of the year to go sailing in this part of the world, but the cruise before ours, they did miss Le Digue because of rough waters. They could not get the tenders off safely. So, but we had a great cruise. I think it was pretty flat almost the entire way. No problems.
We didn't have any rough seas. I think it rained one day, maybe for a little bit.
This is a part of the world where you could get rain, so expect that could happen in some of your ports. We were very lucky. Yeah. Temperature-wise, it's pretty moderate, on the warmer side of moderate, I would say. Our Canadian friends felt it was too warm. Us from Las Vegas thought it was a little cool. Somewhere in between, you'll be fine, I'm sure.
So a big question a lot of people have is, how much did this cruise cost? So like I said, we were on 2 back-to-back cruises. I'm going to refer to my numbers here, but the first cruise from Doha down to Mauritius for that balcony cabin cost us, I'm rounding things a little bit, but about $3,250. That is we had a 15% cruise credit and a $250 cruise next certificate that we applied to that. So you can kind of add that on if you're really specific about it. And then the second cruise cost us about $2,900. Again, we had a 10% future cruise credit that we were able to apply to that. In addition, so that's the price for the cruise that we paid. In addition, you've got tips, the gratuities, which for two people is $40 per day on Norwegian. So that's a little more than $1,000 for the entire 26 days. I think $1,040. And then of course, there's lots of things that you can pay money for. Additional gratuities, if you want to go to specialty restaurants, if you're going to do tours, if you're going to buy souvenirs. So keep that all in mind when you're trying to price it out. For us, this was a very expensive cruise. I mean, what did I say? At average out, just the cost of the cruise is $237 a day. Our normal budget is much closer to $50, $75 a day. So this was a big splurge for us. We were okay with it because of where we were going. I mean, if we wanted to fly to all of these different countries that we went to, that would have cost more than just the cruise that by itself, probably. So we were very happy to pay that, and that's what we paid. So if you are looking for ways to save money, I would go with that inside cabin. I think our upgrading to a balcony, which we really enjoyed, but that probably cost us an additional $2,000, $2,500. So you could definitely save money if you were okay with an inside cabin and just watch all those extra costs. But this, I think, is for what it is. I think it is a well-priced itinerary.
We love this cruise, but there were a few things that went wrong, so we're going to talk about those right now. One of the things was itinerary changes. The cruise we ended up taking was a very different cruise than the one we booked, and those changes happened after final payments were due. So no one was able to get a refund on the cruise if they decided they didn't like those itinerary changes. So that's a little disappointing, and it feels a little dishonest from the cruise line.
Because a lot of these cruises in this time period were having similar itinerary changes. So it's kind of like they knew what they were doing, but they just waited until the last minute to let us know. Again, this is Africa. I think things do change. But also because there was such poor communication around it, it does just feel like you're getting taken advantage a little bit of. Yeah. So some of the changes...
Mozambique was changed. We were hoping to go there. They canceled that. But as we understand, there was civil unrest happening at the time in Maputo. So we wouldn't have wanted to go there and get off the ship anyways. So that was probably a very smart change. There was another change that happened, though.
We were supposed to have an overnight in Mauritius. That got changed from an overnight to a long day, and then the long day got shortened into a regular day. That was very frustrating. We were supposed to go to a different stop in Madagascar, and they scrapped that, sent us back to Reunion for a second time, went back to Antsiranana for a second time, and I don't really have any complaints with those ports, but just kind of that level of changes that was happening. Overall, everything was fine. And, the cruise we took was perfectly fine, but it was a little frustrating having all of those changes coming so late in the process with very little explanation of why. Another thing that's a little bit frustrating is just how poorly things are communicated. So a lot of times, we have cruised a lot. We kind of understand the process of how things work, but then they'll say, tomorrow, here's a schedule for how we're all going to get off the ship for the tenders. And then they don't follow what they told us they were going to do, or things happen a little bit differently. And it can just lead to a lot of frustration for the passengers. So when we got to Le Digue, we were supposed to get there at 7 in the morning, and you just assume. So we talked to one of the cruise next people, and she told us that over half of the people on our first cruise were first-time cruisers. Now that blew my mind, because you wouldn't think people would choose an African cruise to be their very first cruise of all time, but that's what happened. It was a Christmas cruise. I guess people just thought it would be exciting, which it was, but it's not the Caribbean, right? These are places where you have to be extra flexible. And when you come into these ports and things don't go as smoothly as when you don't even know what's supposed to happen, then when things don't go to plan and take a little bit longer, there were a lot of people who ended up being very frustrated by like the tendering process. But the tender process in Ledik took a long time. It was quite a distance away. It was a very busy port. We only had one berth. So even though they had multiple tenders going, you were just stuck in a line while you were waiting for that one to finish so the next one could come in. And so getting off the ship took a long time. At one point, they had called the first group to go stand in line and everybody's waiting there and nothing is happening. And of course, I know because I've been on cruise ships before that all the people who booked a excursion through Norwegian are back in the theater and they're getting fed under deck. And they're getting off first because that's one of the perks of booking a tour with the cruise ship. But the people who have never been on a cruise before, and they probably have a private tour booked, and they're like, I need to get over there, and no one's moving, and they called us to stand here, and now we're just standing in this line that's nothing's happening. It was very frustrating. We had a group of people who started chanting. They're like, let us off, let us off. And it was like, this is going to be a riot. Like, it was scary. And there were some really fantastic crew members there who were able to kind of calm the situation down. And then we left.
But not enough. I think they should have sent more people there to deal
there
with
weren't
the
enough of
situation.
them. There wasn't enough announcements, just letting people know what was happening.
Then they actually announced group 2 before group 1 even started.
So like it wasn't moving.
There's
They
no
announced another
communication
group
between the staff.
It was really weird. That happened frequently where there would just be lots of announcements and there would be different people making the announcements and some people would say it very clearly and some people would get the information out, but it was confusing. And then, you take into account, you've got people on the ship who speak multiple languages. All the announcements are English. Maybe they don't understand it very well at all anyway. There was just a lot of what I would call poor communication, which led to a lot of that.
And it was also inconsistent too. For example, there were a lot of places where we had to do in-person passport interviews.
Yeah.
So
Immigration.
we were giving our passports and taking our passports back and giving our passports and taking them back from the ship over and over. And sometimes they would give us a note in our room that would tell us the list of times that we would have to go to turn in our passport. And then the announcements would be all completely different times.
Yeah.
So there was no consistency with their communication.
Yes. So I think I don't know why this happens, whether it stems from the fact that clearly there are shoestring staff. Staff has been cut, so there's just not as many of them. And so maybe things are just getting lost in that transition. I don't know what's going on. I hope they are able to pull that together. Again, for us as longtime cruisers who understand the process, it was a little annoying, but we understood what we were supposed to do. So it wasn't a huge deal. But for those first-time cruisers, they were having an absolute terrible time at moments because they just didn't understand, and that led to a lot of that anger. Another example for that is when we got off in Abu Dhabi, we had to go through in-person immigration. And so everyone was required to get off the ship, go through immigration. And they kept making announcements. You need to calm down, even if you're not going to get off the ship, or you're not going to be able to get off the ship in Dubai tomorrow because immigration's happening here, not there. So you have to do it here. And they made that announcement that was that clear like once. And then every other time they were just like, you need to come down. Everybody has to go down. And they made that announcement like every half hour for like the entire day. And then when we were getting off the ship in Dubai, there was a woman ahead of us who had not gone through immigration. I don't know how she missed all of those announcements, but they couldn't let her off. She didn't go through immigration. She wasn't allowed to get off. She was very upset, which I understand. But then also it's like, why didn't you go do the thing you were supposed to do? I don't know what her situation was or what happened, but you have to kind of pay attention to stuff like that. Sometimes the passengers, it's self-inflicting injury, right? So when we got off in Reunion, there were a couple of women when we went to check off the ship and walk down, and then we had to go through immigration in Reunion, and they were the people on the ship were like, do you have your passports? And they're like, oh, we're French citizens, we don't need passports for Reunion. And they're like, no, you need your passport. And they were arguing so hard of how they didn't need their passport. And it's like, I'm not going to get involved with that. But it's like, how do those people know that you're French? Even if they're not going to stamp your passport, they still have to see your passport to know that you are a French citizen and are allowed in. You can't just show up and they're not just going to take your word for it. People are very interesting and you're going to see all kinds on the ships. A lot of people who are very frustrated. We think most of it was doable, but Norwegian really needs to up their communication game. So we just want to mention again some special considerations for cruising in Africa. I think we've talked about most of these already, but just keep these in mind if you are planning an itinerary like this. You need to be flexible because things are going to change. It is just the nature of cruising into a place that doesn't get a lot of those passengers. You have to be flexible and know that things are going to change ahead of time so it doesn't ruin your day or ruin your cruise if it doesn't go exactly to plan. You need to plan for extra time in these ports that do not have the infrastructure that you are used to. If you are used to sailing in the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, you might be standing in long lines. Again, for lines, just be aware that there are a lot of very specific immigration rules. Now, the immigration stuff is not the ship's fault, so I can't blame them for this because different countries will require in-person immigration, while other ones will let the cruise ship handle it all behind the scenes. So like David said, it was a lot of us turning in our passports so they could handle this one, and then they would give it back to us because we had to do face-to-face in both Mauritius and in the UAE. And so there was a lot of standing in lines playing the passport game, but that's just the nature of what it is. And so don't let that frustrate you. Just be prepared for it and it's not going to be a big deal. Another one that we didn't kind of mention, but it is harder to find private tours in these places. Like when we are taking private tours in Spain, it is very easy to go online and say, what's a tour that I can take in Malaga? And you get a long list of different tour providers with lots of reviews, and you can know for some certainty that you're going into a good situation. When you're looking for a tour in Madagascar, there just isn't that infrastructure. And so you really have to take a leap of faith. A lot of people decided not to mess with that and just took the ship tours, which is totally fine. We did do some private tours and they ended up being really excellent. So we were very happy about that, but it took some leaps of faith because it's like, I don't know you. I don't know what your company is.
There's no website, no reviews.
We're just taking your word for it that you're going to provide us this service. And all of the ones that we chose came through for us, thank goodness. But you do run that risk if you're kind of doing things on your own. We did have some friends on a different African tour up the west coast of Africa a couple of months ago. And that was a very, widely publicized case where some people took a private tour and did not, the car broke down and they didn't get back to the ship on time and they got left behind. And then they had to go on this massive 4-country trying to catch up with the ship to get back on. You do not want to have that happen to you. And so we did make plans. We're like, if we get trapped in Antsiranana, what are we going to do to be able to get to the next place, whether we were going to fly to Mauritius or fly to Nosy Be? We had some backup plans just in case we did miss the ship. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But, have that in mind. It's a little bit more risky taking a private tour. So our final thoughts and recommendations. David, would you recommend this itinerary to people?
Oh, in a second.
Yeah.
It was such a fun cruise. We saw so many amazing things. One thing I would say is you probably won't be going back to this part of the world. So really take advantage of these ports, see what you can. We are the type of people who tend to just walk around in town and not do excursions, but we did take a lot of excursions and I'm glad we took every excursion we did.
In general, I think we had a terrific experience. I would highly recommend this itinerary, either on Norwegian or on another cruise line, just to get down into these places because they're very exciting and not everybody gets to go there. And if it's something you want to do, we think you should do it. So we are shooting a lot more videos. Like we said, we've got a lot more coming, different reviews on ports, on different tips, tricks, and hacks that we know about taking these long repositioning cruises. If you are interested in that, make sure to subscribe, and I will put our playlist right over here.
Today and not tomorrow.